The night was unusually cold for October, with rain pelting down on the empty streets of downtown. Most people had already rushed home to escape the weather, but one man was just beginning his journey back from work. He had spent the last 12 hours cleaning floors and sanitizing rooms at City General Hospital, a job that didn't pay much but kept food on the table for his 2 kids. The windshield wipers of his old Honda Civic worked overtime against the heavy rain as he drove through the dimly lit streets. The radio played soft jazz, helping him stay alert after the long shift. He was looking forward to getting home, heating up some leftover stew, and catching a few hours of sleep before his morning shift at the auto repair shop where he worked part-time. But life had other plans that night. Through the rain-streaked window, he noticed something unusual. A figure was hunched over on the sidewalk, one hand gripping a lamppost for support, the other cradling what looked like a very pregnant belly. The person seemed to be in obvious distress, struggling to stay upright as the rain soaked through their clothes. His first instinct was to keep driving. In this part of town, at this hour, stopping for strangers wasn't always the wisest choice. Plus, he'd heard too many stories about Good Samaritans getting robbed or worse, but something made him slow down. Maybe it was all those years working at the hospital, seeing people in need every day. Maybe it was remembering how his own sister had struggled during her pregnancy. Whatever it was, he couldn't just drive by. He pulled over carefully, making sure to keep a safe distance. The headlights illuminated the scene better now, a woman in business attire, completely drenched, her face contorted in pain. He rolled down his passenger window just enough to call out, "Ma'am? Are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman looked up, startled. Even through the rain, he could see the mix of relief and hesitation on her face. It was a look he knew well, the same one he sometimes got from patients at the hospital when they saw him coming to clean their rooms. Being a large black man, he'd learned to be extra careful in these situations, to move slowly, to keep his voice gentle. I'm in labor," she managed to say between heavy breaths. "My phone's dead. No cabs would stop. Please." Another contraction hit her, and she doubled over in pain. Without thinking twice, he got out of his car, grabbed the umbrella from his backseat, and walked over to her. Standing at a respectful distance, he held the umbrella over her. "I work at City General," he said softly, showing her his hospital ID badge that still hung around his neck. "It's about 10 minutes from here. I can take you there if you'd like." She looked at his badge, then at his face, then back at her belly. Another contraction made the decision for her. Yes, please. He helped her to his car, making sure she was stable on her feet. Once she was safely in the passenger seat, he quickly ran around to the driver's side, trying to ignore how his uniform was now soaked through. The woman was breathing heavily, trying to time her contractions using her dead phone out of habit. He reached into the backseat and pulled out his phone charger. "Here, use this. You might want to let someone know where you are." As she plugged in her phone, he turned up the heat to help her warm up and carefully pulled back onto the street. "I'm going to call ahead to the ER," he said, connecting his Bluetooth. "They should have everything ready by the time we get there." The woman nodded gratefully, then grimaced as another contraction hit. "Thank you," she whispered between breaths. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." He just smiled and dialed the ER's number, knowing exactly who would be on duty at this hour. "Hey, Miss Chen, it's Mead from housekeeping. Listen, I'm bringing in a pregnant woman in active labor." About 10 minutes out. As they drove through the rainy night, neither of them could have guessed how this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. But that's the thing about kindness. It has a way of coming back to you in the most unexpected ways. The drive to the hospital was tense but quick. Every few minutes, the woman would grip the door handle tightly as another contraction hit, her knuckles turning white with each wave of pain. The man kept glancing over, making sure she was okay, while navigating the wet streets with careful precision. Her phone had finally gathered enough charge to turn on, and notifications started popping up immediately. Several missed calls from her husband, who was stuck in a business meeting 2 hours away. She managed to type out a quick message between contractions. "In labor. Kind stranger taking me to City General. Please come. First baby?" The man asked gently, trying to keep her mind off the pain. She nodded, then winced. Yes, wasn't due for another 3 weeks. She took a deep breath as the contraction passed. I was at work, didn't expect, shouldn't have stayed so late. Hey, babies come when they want to, he said with a warm smile. My sister's kid was 2 weeks early. Decided to show up right in the middle of her baby shower. Now that was a party to remember. The woman managed a laugh, which quickly turned into another grimace. The contractions were getting closer together. Almost there, he reassured her, turning onto the hospital access road. Just hold on a few more minutes. True to his word, they'd pulled up to the emergency entrance where a teen was already waiting with a wheelchair. He recognized the faces, the night shift crew he usually shared coffee with during his breaks. The familiar nurse with the gray-streaked hair took charge immediately. 8 minutes apart, the man reported as he helped the woman out of his car. Started about 40 minutes ago, getting stronger. The nurse nodded approvingly at his observation. Good man. We'll take it from here. But as they started to wheel her away, the woman grabbed his hand. Wait. I don't even know your name. I need to thank you properly. No thanks needed, he said softly. Just focus on bringing that little one into the world safely. He watched as they wheeled her through the automatic doors, then moved his car to the staff parking lot. His shift had ended hours ago, but something made him want to stay, just to make sure everything turned out okay. He found himself walking to the hospital chapel, a quiet space where he sometimes went to think during his lunch breaks. The chapel was empty at this hour, peaceful in the way only hospitals can be in the middle of the night. He sat in one of the back pews, closed his eyes, and said a small prayer for the woman and her baby. He thought about his own kids at home, probably fast asleep by now, watched over by his elderly neighbor who always insisted on helping out during his night shifts. Time passed slowly in the quiet chapel. He must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, someone was gently shaking his shoulder. It was the nurse from earlier. Thought I might find you here, she said with a knowing smile. You always did have a soft heart under that tough exterior. How is she? He asked, straightening up. False alarm, the nurse replied. Braxton Hicks contractions, practice runs, we call them. Very common, especially in first pregnancies, but can be scary if you don't know what they are. We got her calmed down and monitored. Baby's doing fine, staying put for now. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Good, that's good. Her husband arrived about an hour ago. Nice man. Owns some kind of business. They were asking about you, wanted to thank you properly. He shook his head, standing up. No need. Just glad everything worked out okay. He checked his watch and sighed. I should head home. Got another shift in a few hours. The nurse gave him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. You're a good man. Not many would have stopped on a night like this. He gathered his things and headed out to his car, the sky just beginning to show the first hints of dawn. As he drove home, he thought about how differently the night could have gone if he hadn't stopped. One small decision made in a split second could change everything. What he didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. But that's the thing about good deeds. They have a ripple effect, touching lives in unexpected ways, coming back to you when you least expect it. Little did he know, tomorrow would bring another surprise, one that would start with a mysterious motorcycle following him on his way to work. The next morning came too quickly. After just 3 hours of sleep, he dragged himself out of bed, made breakfast for his kids, and saw them off to school. The memory of last night's events felt almost like a dream as he drove to his morning shift at the auto repair shop. That's when he first noticed it, a sleek black motorcycle in his rearview mirror. He wouldn't have paid much attention to it, except it had been following the exact same route as his car for the past 10 minutes. Every turn he made, the motorcycle followed. At first, he tried to convince himself it was just coincidence. Plenty of people took this route to work. But when he deliberately took a wrong turn and the motorcycle still followed, his heart began to race. He'd heard stories about people getting followed after helping strangers. Not all of them ended well. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his palms getting sweaty. The motorcycle kept a consistent distance, not too close, but close enough to make him uncomfortable. The rider was wearing a black helmet with a tinted visor, making it impossible to see their face. His mind raced through possible scenarios. Could it be someone from the hospital? No, they would have just talked to him there. A relative of the pregnant woman? Maybe, but why follow him like this? He thought about calling the police, but wondered if he was just being paranoid. He decided to test his suspicions one more time. He pulled into a gas station, parking near the front where the security cameras could see him clearly. The motorcycle drove past slowly, then circled back around and parked 2 spots away. His heart pounded as he watched the rider dismount. They were tall, well-dressed in what looked like an expensive business suit under their riding jacket. This wasn't your typical troublemaker. Still, he made sure his car doors were locked as the rider approached. The mysterious figure stopped beside his window and slowly raised their hands to remove their helmet. The man's finger hovered over the panic button on his key fob, ready to sound the alarm if needed. But when the helmet came off, he was surprised to see a friendly face. It was the pregnant woman's husband from the hospital. The man was smiling, though he looked somewhat embarrassed. "I'm so sorry for following you like this," the husband said quickly, seeing the worry on his face. "I realize now how creepy this must seem. I needed to find you, and this was the only way I could think of." Relieved but still cautious, he rolled down his window slightly. "How did you find me?" "The hospital gave me your work schedule when I explained who I was. I know that sounds strange, but I have a good reason." The husband ran a hand through his hand nervously. "My wife told me everything you did last night. How you stopped when no one else would. How you kept her calm, got her to the hospital safely. Anyone would have done the same," he replied, starting to feel more at ease. The husband shook his head. "But they didn't. You did. And it meant everything to us." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Look, I own a chain of automotive shops across the city. My manager at the downtown location just quit, and I've been struggling to find someone qualified to replace him." The man in the car sat up straighter, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. "My wife mentioned you work part-time at a repair shop. The hospital staff told me you're one of their most reliable employees. I did some checking this morning. You've got certification in automotive repair, customer service experience." The husband smiled. "How would you feel about managing one of my shops? Full benefits, better hours, and twice what you're making now at both your jobs combined." For a moment, he couldn't speak. This had to be some kind of joke, right? Things like this didn't just happen in real life. But the husband's expression was completely serious. I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "Said yes," the husband replied. "One act of kindness showed me exactly the kind of person you are. That's worth more than any resume." As the morning sun rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the gas station parking lot, the 2 men sat and talked. About cars, about family, about the strange ways life sometimes works out, and about how sometimes the simple decision to help a stranger can change everything. The job offer felt like a dream, but reality had a way of making itself known. As he sat in his car, still processing the morning's events, his phone buzzed with a text from the repair shop where he was already an hour late. His hands trembled slightly as he typed out his resignation message. After 12 years of working 2 jobs to make ends meet, he was about to take a leap of faith. The husband had given him his business card and invited him to visit the downtown shop that afternoon. "Take the day to think about it," he'd said. "But I hope you'll say yes. We need more people like you." He spent the morning driving around the city, trying to clear his head. The streets looked different somehow, full of possibility. He thought about his kids, about how he'd missed so many of their school events because of his work schedule, about how tired he always was, how he couldn't remember the last time he'd had a full night's sleep. At noon, he pulled into the parking lot of the downtown automotive shop. It was bigger than where he currently worked, with 6 service bays and a modern customer waiting area. Through the large windows, he could see mechanics working efficiently, the space clean and well organized. As he walked in, the bell above the door chimed softly. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "You must be him," she said warmly. The boss called ahead, said you'd be stopping by. She led him on a tour of the facility. Everything was top of the line. The latest diagnostic equipment, hydraulic lifts in perfect condition, a break room that looked more like a small cafe. The mechanics nodded respectfully as they passed, some offering friendly waves. "Most of our staff has been here for years," she explained. "The boss takes good care of us. Health insurance, paid vacation, retirement plans, things that are hard to find in this industry." His mind went to his own situation. No benefits, no paid time off, constantly juggling two schedules. He thought about the times he had to choose between paying for his daughter's school supplies and getting his son's teeth cleaned. Back in the office, he found himself sitting across from the husband again, who'd arrived during the tour. The offer letter between them looked almost too good to be true, a salary that would let him quit both his current jobs, full benefits for his whole family, regular hours that would let him be home for dinner every night. "I know it's a big change," the husband said, noting his hesitation. "But sometimes life gives us these moments for a reason. You stopped to help my wife when no one else would. Let me help you now." He thought about all the times he taught his kids about doing the right thing, even when it was hard. About how sometimes kindness comes back to you in unexpected ways. Slowly, he picked up the pen. "There's just one thing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need to give proper notice at the hospital. Those people, they're like family." The husband smiled understandingly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The position will be waiting for you." That evening, he drove to the hospital for what would be one of his last shifts. The familiar halls felt different now, knowing he would soon be saying goodbye. The nurse with the grey-streaked hair was at her usual station. "I heard the news," she said, pulling him into a surprise hug. "Couldn't happen to a better person." Word had spread quickly through the hospital staff. Throughout his shift, people kept stopping him to offer congratulations. The cleaning crew organized an impromptu celebration in the break room, sharing coffee and day-old pastries from the cafeteria. As he mopped floors for one of the last times, he found himself outside the room where they had taken the pregnant woman the night before. Through the window, he could see her resting peacefully, her husband by her side. They were talking quietly, smiling, hands resting on her belly where their baby was still safely growing. The sight made him smile. Sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the smallest decisions. A simple choice to stop and help someone in need had set off a chain of events that would change not just his life, but his children's lives too. He thought about how he would tell them the news when he got home. About how he could finally attend their school plays, help with homework, maybe even take that family vacation they always dreamed about but could never afford. One act of kindness had opened a door he never even knew existed. As he pushed his mop down the quiet hospital corridor for one of the final times, he felt a deep sense of peace. Sometimes, he realized, the best endings come disguised as ordinary moments on rainy nights. 3 months passed quickly. The transition to his new job had been smoother than he'd expected. His coworkers respected him, and he discovered he had a natural talent for management. Best of all, he was finally able to spend quality time with his children. One sunny morning, as he walked through the shop's service area checking on ongoing repairs, a familiar face appeared at the front desk. It was the pregnant woman, now in her final weeks, her belly even more prominent than before. "I hoped I'd find you here," she said, smiling warmly. "My husband told me this is where you work now." He welcomed her into his office, noticing how much more relaxed she looked compared to that rainy night. She sat in the comfortable chair across from his desk, looking around at the family photos he'd put up, his kids at their recent school performances, pictures he'd finally been able to attend. "I never properly thanked you," she began, resting a hand on her belly. "That night, I was so scared. Not just because of the contractions, but because I felt so alone and vulnerable. When you stopped, I'll admit I was hesitant at first." He nodded understandingly. "It's natural to be cautious, especially at night." "But something in your eyes," she continued. "The gentle way you spoke, how you showed me your hospital ID, kept your distance until I felt comfortable. Those small gestures meant everything." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "My husband and I would like you to have this." Inside was an invitation to a baby shower scheduled for the following weekend. He looked up surprised. "I know it's not typical to invite someone you barely know to such a personal event," she said, noticing his expression. "But you're the reason I'm still carrying this baby safely. Those weren't real labor pains that night, but the doctor said if I hadn't gotten to the hospital when I did, there could have been complications." His throat felt tight with emotion. "I was just doing what anyone would do." She shook her head. "But that's just it. Not anyone would do what you did. We checked the security cameras from that night. Dozens of cars passed by. Only you stopped." They talked for a while longer about life's strange twists and turns, about how one moment of kindness could spiral into something bigger. Before she left, she paused at the door. "You know, my husband says you're doing an amazing job here. The shop's numbers have never been better, but more importantly, the customers love you. They say you treat everyone with the same respect and care you showed me that night." After she left, he sat quietly in his office, thinking about how different his life had become. The long nights of exhaustion were gone. His kids were happier, his work was fulfilling, and he'd even started taking online business courses to learn more about management. The baby shower invitation sat on his desk, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from our most instinctive acts of kindness. He picked up his phone to call his sister, knowing she'd love to hear this latest development in the story she'd been following since that rainy night. Just then, a text message came through from the pregnant woman. "By the way, we found out it's a girl, and we'd love your input on her middle name. After all, you're part of her story now too." He set the phone down, overwhelmed by the gesture. Outside his office window, he could see his team working efficiently, the shop running like a well-oiled machine. From the wall, his children smiled at him from their recent photos, happy, well-fed, finally getting the attention they deserved. Life had changed so much in 3 short months, all because he'd made a split-second decision to help someone in need. As he turned back to his work, he couldn't help but smile, wondering what other surprises life might have in store. What he didn't know was that the biggest surprise was still to come, and it would arrive right on schedule, at the baby shower he'd just been invited to attend. The baby shower was held at a cozy community center, decorated with soft pink and white balloons. He felt slightly out of place at first, being one of the few men there besides the husband. His sister had convinced him to go, saying it was important to embrace these moments when life offers them. He brought a simple gift, a handmade wooden rocking chair he'd been working on during his newfound free evenings. Woodworking had become his hobby since getting regular hours, something to do while helping his kids with homework. The chair wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy and made with care. When he walked in with the chair, conversation briefly paused. The pregnant woman's face lit up. "You made this?" she asked, running her hand along the smooth wooden arm. "Been working on it for a few weeks," he replied, slightly embarrassed by the attention. "My grandmother always said every baby needs a rocking chair." The afternoon passed pleasantly. He found himself chatting with other guests, sharing the story of that rainy night when asked. Each time he told it, people shook their heads in amazement, though to him, it still felt like the most natural thing in the world. During the gift-opening ceremony, the pregnant woman saved his chair for last. As she and her husband sat in it together, she suddenly grabbed her belly. The room went quiet. "Just a kick," she laughed, seeing everyone's concerned faces. "She's been very active today. Would you like to feel?" He hesitated, but she waved him over. As he placed his hand gently on her belly, he felt a strong kick. The baby, as if sensing a friend, gave an extra strong punch right against his palm. "She knows her guardian angel," the husband said warmly. Then his expression became serious. "Actually, we have something we'd like to share with everyone." The husband stood, addressing the room. "As many of you know, our journey to this moment hasn't been easy. We tried for years to have a baby, faced countless disappointments. When we finally succeeded, we promised ourselves we'd do everything possible to protect this child." He squeezed his wife's hand before continuing. "That night, when my wife went into what we thought was early labor, we were terrified of losing everything we dreamed of. But then this man, this stranger, stopped to help when no one else would." The room was silent now, all eyes on them. "The doctors told us that the stress and panic that night could have caused real complications if she hadn't gotten to the hospital when she did. His simple act of kindness might have saved our baby. And in the months since then, he's shown us the same character every day, turning around our struggling downtown shop, treating every customer like family." The pregnant woman stood carefully, holding an envelope. "That's why we want to make an announcement. We're not just naming you as the baby's godfather, if you'll accept. We're also making you a partner in the business." He sat down hard in a nearby chair, stunned. The envelope she handed him contained partnership papers for a 25% stake in the entire automotive chain. "But this is too much," he protested weakly. The husband shook his head. "What's too much?" Rewarding kindness. Investing in someone who's proved their worth not just through one act, but through months of dedicated work. This isn't charity, it's good business sense. The pregnant woman took his hand. You taught us something important that night. Success isn't just about making money or growing a business. It's about the connections we make, the lives we touch. We want our daughter to grow up understanding that. As the party continued around him, he sat in the rocking chair he'd made, holding the envelope that would change his family's future forever. He thought about that rainy night, about how close he'd come to driving past, about how the smallest choices can lead to the biggest changes. A soft kick against his hand brought him back to the present. The baby was active again, as if celebrating with everyone else. Sometimes, he realized, angels don't have wings, they just have kind hearts and the courage to use them. 1 year later, he stood in front of the downtown auto shop, now bearing his name alongside the original owners. The morning sun glinted off the freshly painted sign, and he took a moment to appreciate how far he'd come. Inside, the shop was bustling with activity. They'd expanded to 8 service bays, hired 3 new mechanics, and had a waiting list of customers who specifically requested their shop. But what made him most proud wasn't the business success, it was the culture they'd built. Every morning, the staff gathered for coffee before opening, sharing stories and helping each other plan their day. They'd started a training program for young mechanics from the local technical school, giving them the same chance he'd once received. The break room wall was covered with thank you cards from customers, each one telling a story of kindness returned. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was a photo of his goddaughter, now 6 months old, sitting in the wooden rocking chair he'd made. She was growing fast, already trying to crawl, her eyes bright with curiosity about the world around her. The baby's parents had kept their word about the partnership, but more importantly, they'd become like family. Sunday dinners were a regular thing now, their 2 families sharing meals and making plans for the future. His kids had gained an aunt and uncle, and the baby had 2 extra siblings watching over her. As he walked through the shop, checking on the day's work, he remembered something his grandmother used to say: kindness is like a boomerang. It always comes back to you, often in ways you least expect. She was right. That one rainy night had started a chain reaction that transformed not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. His children were thriving in school now that he could be more present in their lives. His sister had quit her second job too, coming to work as the shop's office manager. Even his elderly neighbor who used to watch his kids had been hired to run the customer service desk part-time, giving her purpose and extra income in her retirement years. The pregnant woman, now a new mother, still came by the shop regularly. Sometimes just to chat, sometimes with coffee for everyone, always with the baby who seemed to light up the whole place with a smile. She'd recently started a program connecting working parents with affordable childcare, inspired by the struggles she'd seen in others. The husband had kept his word about making him a true partner. They'd opened 2 more shops in the past year, each one running on the same principles of kindness and community that had brought them together. Their business model was simple but effective. Treat every customer like family, pay workers fairly, and remember that success isn't just measured in dollars. That morning, as he did his rounds, a young woman walked in looking worried. Her car had broken down 2 blocks away, and she was late for a job interview. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys. "Let me help you," he said, remembering another rainy night not so long ago. Sometimes we all need a little kindness to get where we're going. As he drove her to her interview, he thought about how life has a way of coming full circle. 1 year ago, he was working 2 jobs, barely getting by, wondering if things would ever get better. Now here he was, paying forward the kindness that had changed his life. The young woman made it to her interview on time. 2 weeks later, she came back to thank him. She'd gotten the job. She became another regular customer, bringing more people with her, the ripple effect continuing to spread. That evening, as he locked up the shop, he looked at the sign one more time. Below their names, they'd added a simple motto: "Where kindness meets excellence." It wasn't just a slogan. It was a reminder that the biggest changes in life often start with the smallest acts of compassion. He headed home, looking forward to dinner with his kids, homework time, and maybe a little more work on his latest woodworking project. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others. But now he knew the secret. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change lives in ways we never expect.